Okay, so it's going to be a really long video. There's so much to talk about, and it's a huge subject. over 200 flood stories in the whole world. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and go over some of this stuff. I'm going to save one of the Indian legends for last because I did some back research on it and found some very cool stuff out about stuff that supports this particular legend to a point of physical evidence. It's amazing. But so let's get on with it. Enjoy the show. It's long. I know there's a lot of good information and kind of funny stuff as well. So let's take a look at it and then you can see what you think. Take it easy.
One of the greatest stories ever told is that of the worldwide flood. Most cultures in antiquity have a flood myth. In India, a little fish swims up to the wise sage Manu and warns him of a great flood. Manu builds a ship, and the fish grows in size and carries the boat through the waters. Amongst the Norse, it is the mighty frost giant Bergelmir who survives a deluge of blood pouring from wounds of the cosmic Ymir, whose body forms the world. Similarly in Egypt, as the reign of Ra comes to an end, the human race is drowned out by the wrathful blood of Sekhmet. Perhaps a tenuous connection, complicated by the introduction of a great flood in chapter 175 of the Egyptian Book of the Dead. In Greek myth, it is Deucalion, son of Prometheus, who survives a worldwide flood in an ark and repeoples the world by throwing stones behind his shoulder. From East Asia, Micronesia, Australia, North and South America, Europe and India, flood stories prevail throughout oral cultures. Why is the Great Flood a universal story? Did the story originate in far-off times and migrate to the Americas before the melting of the last ice age? If so, then the flood myth is exceedingly ancient. Did the story migrate across the seas from Asia to the Americas? Dispersion theory has always been a hot-button issue, especially for American scholars. Or did the flood story independently originate around the globe? No one can say for sure, and the age and origin of the story will always remain a subject of scholarly debate. More importantly, does the Great Flood in myth describe an actual worldwide flood, or a local geological event?
The flood stories are really very interesting. You find them in the Bible. What they all say is that this extraterrestrial race, the angels, the gods, whatever we want to call them today, they basically just got tired of humanity. They became noisy, rebellious, and it was just time to wipe them out.
It's very possible that the aliens decided that in order to cleanse the planet, they needed to do things of huge magnitude, like the flood that the Bible talks about as Noah. God came down to him and said he was going to punish mankind. And Noah, you are good, and I want you to build this massive ark and collect all these animals, a male and female, and you put them in this boat, and you float away, and you start all over again.
When we come in the Bible and we see Noah, we find that he somehow knows the future, whereas nobody else on earth seems to know this. But specifically, he has been given blueprints, somehow a device whereby he can survive this catastrophe. Now that is something very specific, which singles Noah out as being a person who might have had exposure to ancient aliens.
Maybe the extraterrestrials created some type of a catastrophe, but it's also possible that the flood itself was a natural disaster, and extraterrestrials warned the local population about this impending massive flood. Extraterrestrials ensured our continued survival.
Could there be a reason why humans have survived such disasters time and time again?
Long before missionaries ever arrived in the New World, the Indians had ancient legends of a great flood, very similar to that of Noah. And this is the one that the Cowichan tell. In ancient times, there were so many people in the land that they lived everywhere. Soon, hunting became bad and food was scarce, so the people quarreled over the hunting territories. Even in those days, the people were skilled in making fine canoes and paddles from cedars and clothing and baskets from their bark. In dreams, their wise old men could see the future, and there came a time when they all had similar bad dreams. They came over and over again. The dreams warned of a great flood. This troubled the wise men who told each other about their dreams. They found that they'd all dreamed that rain fell for such a long time, or that the river rose, causing a great flood, so that all of the people were drowned. They were much afraid and called a council to hear their dreams and decide what should be done. One said they should build a great raft and by tying many canoes together. Some of the people agreed, but others laughed at the old men and their dreams. The people who believed in the dreams worked hard building their raft. It took many moons of hard work, lashing huge cedar log canoes together with strong ropes of cedar bark. When it was completed, they tied the raft with the great rope of cedar to the top of the Mount Cowichan by passing one end of the rope through the center of a huge stone, which can still be seen there today. During this time, the people were working on the raft. Those who did not believe in the dreams were idle and laughed. But they did admire the fine, solid raft when it was at last finished and floated in Cowichan Bay. Soon after the raft was ready, huge raindrops started falling, rivers overflowed, and the valleys were flooded. Although people climbed Mount Cowichan to avoid the great flood, it too was soon underwater. But those who had believed the dreams took food to the raft, and they and their families climbed into it as the waters rose. They lived on the raft for many days and could see nothing but water. Even the mountain tops had disappeared beneath the flood. The people became much afraid when their canoes began to flood and they prayed for help. But nothing happened for a long time, and then the rain stopped. The waters began to go down after a time, and finally the raft was grounded on top of Mount Cowichan. The huge stone anchor and heavy rope that held it safe. As the waters sank lower and lower, the people could see their lands, but their homes had all been swept away. The valleys and forests had been destroyed. But the people went back to their old land and started to rebuild their homes. After a long time, the people increased, and once again, the land was filled, and the people started to quarrel again. But this time, they separated into tribes and clans, all going to different places. The storytellers say this is how people spread all over the earth. So from the Cowichan people, Cowichan, we get this little doodad that was found really close to the area. It has Egyptian stuff. It was found near this mountain, Mount Prevost, also called Mount Cowichan by the Native Americans. This is the peak where during the Great Flood the canoes were lashed together and then tethered to this rock at the top. So it must have been a very long tether. So here we have a different view on the other side. Looking back, you see the sheer cliff face, and you see the white tower there. That tower is supposed to be right at the tether point. Now let's take another view of that right here. And this is on the back side as well. And I don't have it with me, but there's a mark on the rock that shows where they tied off, and nice little items like that. So let's go and look at some markings that show us what the glaciers would have done. When excavations started in the Valley of the Kings, they noticed that there was erosion that defied anything that they knew about. They doubted that the Nile had risen that far. Of course, they hadn't taken into account the meandering river either, but they suspected that at one time there had been a flood or a very wet region there. So even as far back as you know, when they first started excavations, the Sumerian depiction of the Great Flood and their story of the flood. Now, it's interestingly enough, both Egyptian, Sumerian, all the Middle Eastern countries are pretty much talking about one group of people in their myths. Now, this is the side of the Sphinx. It shows erosion on several different levels for extended periods of time on each level. Some of the sediment they found near the base in their current excavation is mud-like, suggesting a flood at one point as well. So if we move along here to, okay, this is another Indonesian, let's see, is that Indonesian? Yeah, and then we have another South African flood story here. You're going to find flood stories from over 200 nations. This is a little idea of what they were trying to say. Now, the ice would have been that tall in the glacial regions. The wall of water, I'm sure, when it came through, would look like, alright, this whole area here had at once been covered by glacier and then flooded out in the areas that look like they've been flooded out. It looks like at the bottleneck it was probably a wall of ice there, and when that let loose, it just probably let loose several times. Water has a tendency to go the same way each time, so it could have been underwater at one point, the whole place. This is a depiction of the Missoula flood. Now this is the second flood of the three that would have happened during the three different ice ages. So during this one, it went over an older one, and we'll go over that in a minute. But anyway, this flood probably didn't happen the way they got it shown here. It probably came in one big gush. This is at some of the cobble from that flood, and as you get back towards the source of where the flood started, you'll see bigger and bigger sizes of these rocks. So this is obviously quite a ways from, because I'm telling you, 1 trillion gallons of water coming through, and that sucker's gonna push these babies quite a ways before it settles out. So this scenario happened over and over. This is after the flood, obviously, but notice how quickly there's some broken trees, there's some living trees. Not everything got wiped out, because there's that sweet zone in the center there, and strange things happen in strange ways sometimes. You could have, I know of valleys in the higher altitudes where there's whole glades right in the middle of ice all around it, but beautiful lush forest at the bottom. Here's further away even than those other cobbles where you'd get this kind of sediment. People, plants, animals, everything gets, whatever was the most of is what you found. Those poor giants down in the southern areas didn't stand much of a chance, I don't think. I don't think they got warned when everybody else did. So here's what's left after many hundreds of thousands of years of sitting there, silt washed over, ground cover, nice rolling hills, but that's how it settles. When try it in your driveway, it's a pile of sand, run some water through it, see what it does. It leaves these mounds and valleys and little rivulet kind of markings. How about this? Explain how that got formed in a perfect square. That could have been the base of something big, or it could have been just the way the glaciers came through, and then maybe it was on the bottom of the sea for a while. It's a pretty well known fact that these continents drop all the time and they rise up again. We have shells on the top of mountains. Here's a beautiful example of ancient sedimentary rock. Well, how'd that happen? Well, I wager that humankind has come up to our level a few times, and Mother Nature is a bit stronger than we are, and who knows what they did to escape that. Maybe some of them escaped and figured they'd just watch what the rest of the world did from then on, and that's where UFOs come from. This is higher up on the Missoula flood. These are the big boulder fields, and it's closer to where the front edge of the ice let go. Must have been a heck of a sight to see that coming down at you. But the people were warned in every continent, at every time, without fail, different ways, dreams, whatever. Now this whole area would have got washed right out at one time and then just settled down into this river formation. And okay, another depiction of the flood. Remember, this happened all over the world, not just in one spot, not just one time, and many times. I would think that the flood story could probably be repeated. Here's what I was talking about before, the Missoula flood, and then the Bonneville before that, which is a much deeper and bigger flood. May have been the original flood that you hear so much about. That one there moved a lot more material, but maybe there was just more material to be made. I mean, the earth is still getting ground down every day, so more remnants of civilized man that seems to have gotten washed in South America. Now, South America would have had its own glaciers coming off the Peruvian mountains, remember, and we don't know how these glaciers came through, whether or not other continents were raised up, and when in hell this continent got raised up so that there was seashells in it on the mountains. I mean, think about that. These floods changed everything. Undersea civilizations 4,000, 12,000 feet down, and yet one day they were above ground. So they had to have dropped suddenly, and that's probably what happened to Atlantis, pole shifting and such. This crater happened after the floods, after the Ice Age. It was way over, obviously, because it doesn't have any of the flood patterns. This is another thing. This is 4,500 feet down. Tell me that was above ground once. Well, of course it was. But when they try to tell you about the Ice Age and stuff, they forget to tell you, oh yeah, by the way, that was here too. Yeah. Another depiction of the flood. It's funny how much is left out in debates, like Bill Nye and such, use such weak arguments. Here's a section of the world where, in Asia, where it flooded out more than once, and you can see the different, one was bigger than the other. You see that, how that kind of petered out in several layers. That's from different size floods. Here's rock sediment around some man-made objects. What do you think of that? This is actually in the mud. Well, it's actually rock now, but it was mud once. That's amazing to me. That's a good example of what we're talking about. Someday we're going to find huge areas underneath the sea, probably, that used to be above ground. So, yes, I think we lived when the dinosaurs lived. I think we've been around for millions of years, and we keep getting beat down. I believe that Machu Picchu and places like that were hit by the seismic activity that happened when all this shifting took place, and things got changed in a hurry, and their civilization just fell to pieces because fell on their heads, basically. And they picked up the pieces, moved on. Remnants of the floods covered over millions of acres, probably billions of acres of lost civilizations. Rock-strewn plateaus now left where it was at its most violent. It left no topsoil for it to get buried up by. It was all downriver. So it's quite a conundrum, and in so many different time periods that humankind could be as advanced as cassette tapes would get buried in mud and be rock. Footprints in the sand become rock. We become something different. So, think about that. Think about what's been going on with everything else and all the other stuff that we've shown you today. And I'm sure you'll understand what I'm trying to tell you about everything. So have a great day and enjoy the rest of your week.